A hidden staircase in a French church leads down to a 400-year-old burial vault stacked with centuries of corpses. Beneath the ruins of a 1500-year-old Istanbul church, secret passages open onto two sealed rooms carved for mysterious rituals. And in Turkey, a forgotten 5th century church warns visitors that only the righteous may enter, a message hidden for over 800 years. These are forbidden objects found inside old churches. During restoration work at St. Philibert Church in Dijon, France, workers came across something pretty freaky. Hidden behind a wall was a staircase no one had seen in hundreds of years, and it led straight down to a burial vault sealed for around 400 years. Lead archaeologist Vincent Dumas explained that inside they found wooden coffins with the remains of adults and children, and because space was limited, the, quote, bones of each individual were pushed to the sides to make room for the last deceased. The vault goes back to the 15th or 16th century, but beneath the church floor they dug up even older burials. There were slab tombs from the 11th to 13th centuries, and even deeper, they found sarcophagi from the 6th to 8th centuries. Dumas said these layers prove that each church was built on the remains of the previous one, showing almost 1,000 years of people burying their dead in the same spot. And all of this started because they were doing simple restoration work. Nuts. An Istanbul archaeologist recently came across something really cool under the ruins of the 1500-year-old St. Polyectus Church. While digging, they found a hidden underground passage that connects to two sealed-off rooms. Nobody even knew they were down there, but the layout seems to suggest they were part of the church, possibly used in rituals that happened back when the city was still called Constantinople. The passage and rooms aren't just bare stone, they're nicely carved and decorated, so this probably wasn't just, some random storage area. The church was originally built between 524 and 527 by Princess Anastasia Juliana, who was basically trying to one-up Emperor Justinian and his wife Theodora by flexing her own wealth and power. Even in ruins, the place still makes a statement. What's crazy is how much of it survived earthquakes. Mahir Polat, Deputy Secretary General of Istanbul Metropolitan Municipality, said, Istanbul, which is currently struggling with earthquakes, has experienced dozens of earthquakes over the past 1,500 years. However, the structure we're seeing now has managed to survive all of them. We should learn lessons from this. In Turkey, archaeologists were working at the ruins of the ancient city of Olympus when they came across a 5th century Christian church that hadn't been seen in over 1,000 years. At the entrance, they found an inscription that had been buried and ignored for centuries. Translated, it reads, "Only those on the righteous path may enter here." So it was a warning. Only people who followed the church rules could go inside. The floor of the church is covered in mosaics with leaves, vines, and other plant designs, and some have the names of the people who paid for them. They also found big storage jars and a building that looks like a temple, along with layers of Roman, Byzantine, and Hellenistic architecture. So this city was in use for a long time. Olympus was abandoned by the 12th century, so this message hasn't been seen in over 800 years. It's a simple phrase, but it does kind of tell you a lot about the city. People here cared about rules, their faith, and showed off their wealth with fancy church art. In eastern Finland, churches were hiding something I thought I read wrong at first: frog coffins. And yes, these were tiny coffins with frogs inside them. They were part of folk magic. Some churches had dozens, some even more. Archaeologists dug into one church and found about 32. According to records from the time, the coffins were pushed through ventilation hatches or buried under stone foundations. The coffins are about 15 centimeters long and would have a frog wrapped in fishing net, sometimes impaled with a needle and thread. One report says a frog's mouth was even stitched shut. Now, I mentioned folk magic before, but what was the specific point of this? Well, it was to either mess with someone's luck or protect against bad magic. One old healer described the ritual in detail. Catch a reddish frog without touching it with bare hands. Put it on its back in a tiny coffin. Bind its legs, nail the lid through the frog's heart, and then carry it around the cowshed while chanting. The ritual could also include cow hair or pieces of the person's clothing, depending on whether it was meant to heal, curse, or protect. In Europe and even parts of North America and Australia, churches and old buildings have been found over the years hiding something kinda weird. shoes, tiny worn shoes shoved into chimneys, under floors, above ceilings, tucked around doors and windows. The oldest recorded one was behind the choir stalls in Winchester Cathedral, installed in 1308. Most of these shoes were used, about half belonged to kids. Archaeologist Brian Hoggard says the locations, quote, suggest that some may have been concealed as magical charms to protect the occupants of the building against evil influences such as demons, ghosts, and witches, end quote. Some may have also been meant to bless a woman with fertility or act as offerings to household spirits. A fun piece of folklore here, story goes that witches were drawn to the human scent of a shoe, and once inside they couldn't get out. Not exactly sure why that would have been the case, but basically the shoes were like little traps. Researchers have found hundreds of these hidden shoes over the years, and the tradition didn't die out until the 20th century. Even as late as 1964, a shoe was placed in the foundation of a factory for luck. In the town of Folkestone, England, a set of bones has been talked about for over 100 years. They were first dug up in 1885 inside the Church of St. Mary and St. Eanswythe, and people immediately wondered if they belonged to St. Eanswythe herself, a young nun who founded one of Britain's earliest monasteries around 660. For years, there wasn't a way to really know, but then in 2020, researchers used modern equipment to take a closer look. They found the bones were from a woman who died in her late teens or early 20s and seemed to have lived a pretty comfortable life. Radiocarbon dating placed her in the middle of the 7th century. Andrew Richardson from the Canterbury Archaeological Trust said that, yeah, it was probably Eanswythe. It makes sense. Eanswythe was a granddaughter of a king, so pretty comfortable life, and she died young. There are still some questions though. Why were her bones hidden in a wall instead of being put on display? Excavators think the answer might be the anti-Catholic Reformation. As the movement swept through England, relics considered objects of false worship were destroyed, so they might have been trying to hide the saint's remains from being torched, in a fire or something. In Hadstock, England, St. Botolph's Church has a story. For years, people thought the large piece of skin nailed to its door belonged to a Viking raider who tried to loot the church. He was flayed alive as a warning to others. But recent research has totally changed that story. Cambridge scholar Rudy MacLeod and his team used a technique called zooms, which can figure out what species skin or bone comes from. And they found the skin wasn't actually human at all, sadly. At St. Botolph's and Westminster Abbey, it was cow skin, while St. Michael and All Angels Church had horse or donkey hide. Yeah, the whole Viking skin being used on church doors thing was not an isolated incident. But MacLeod said, quote, "In the absence of any samples actually proving to be human, it looks like this story might have originated for one of the churches as a local myth first and then spread to others quickly," end quote. The myth goes way back, but the truth is way less gruesome. It's still weird though. I mean, why even stretch a bunch of animal skin over a church door and say it was from a slain Viking? As MacLeod put it, the quote, morbid fascination associated with this myth likely explains its persistence, as well as serving as deterrent to would-be church desecrators. In Venice, inside the Basilica of Saint Maria e San Donato, there's something you'd never expect to see in a church: the bones of a dragon. Or maybe you would, I don't know. I guess if there's anywhere dragon bones are going to be, I guess, an old church. The legend goes that these ribs belong to a fierce dragon that was killed by Saint Donatus, a 4th century saint whose story is almost entirely legendary. The bones didn't start out in Venice. They were taken from Cephalonia in the 1120s by the Venetian leader who took the dragon bones during one of his raids on Byzantine Greece. Alongside them came the saint's own remains. The legend says Donatus was a childhood friend of Julian the Apostate and performed a bunch of miracles before dying, including raising a woman from the dead, exorcising a demon, restoring sight to a blind woman, and finally killing the dragon that had poisoned a well. Quite a life. The so-called dragon bones are now hanging behind the altar, mostly out of sight unless you know where to look. The church doesn't even mention them on its markers. Of course, do scientists actually think they're dragon bones? No, but I do love this story. In 1866, workers doing repairs at St. Mary the Virgin in Northamptonshire came across something weird inside one of the church's pillars. They reached in and pulled out a crumbling basket, and inside that basket was a mummified human heart. Word of the find spread through the nearby village of Woodford. Some said it was the heart of a monk who haunted the church at night. Others thought it belonged to a crusader who died far from home, but whose friends had somehow managed to bring his heart all the way back to England. There's a slightly more solid lead in a document from 1280 though, which says the heart might have belonged to a local noble, Roger de Kirkton. He died in Norfolk, but apparently his heart was entombed in his home church at Woodford. No one knows for sure though. Even today, you can see the delicate mummified heart in its original spot inside the pillar, now behind glass. In Rome, the Dominican monastery keeps what's claimed to be the right arm and hand of Saint Mary Magdalene. Supposedly, it's the very arm she used to anoint Jesus' feet, which is why it's treated as especially sacred. The relic is displayed in a glass and gold container shaped like an arm, only comes out on occasion for display. This isn't the only part of Mary Magdalene that churches claim to have. Her skull is in France, various bones, hair, and a tooth are sitting in churches across Europe. The arm in Rome is probably the most famous one, that people have been coming to look at it for centuries. Does anyone really know if it's hers? Not really. There's no trail from her 1st century burial to this monastery. Most likely it showed up in the Middle Ages, when churches were desperate for holy relics to boost their status. Still, the church treats it like the real thing, and thousands of pilgrims over the years have come to see it. I've been your host, James, and I will catch you, yes, you specifically, in the next video.